This Sabbath morning, our scholarship takes us to the faculty of truth. That's the word of Yah. And our curriculum study this morning is the Skull'S Ayin. The Skull'S Eye. Ayin is the Hebrew word here for high. This morning we want to look at that and see if we can make sense of the subject and the implications for us, because throughout time, as we study the Word of Yah, and we try and understand the functioning of the various church, the institutional churches, one gets the impression that the members have become kind of customers, and they are trying to purchase proximity to Yahweh by way of their customs and the rituals practiced, yet they seem somewhat void of the understanding of the word. And this morning we are in search of that to see if we can look at it in a way that perhaps we have not looked at it before. We want to look at that eye, that ayin. In fact, the secondary subject is the good eye of consciousness. That's what we want to look at this morning. And it's based on a text in Matthew. If you join me there, Matthew, that is Matthew, that's the Hebrew, and we're going to take portion 6 and verse 22. Yeshua declared, "The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good," in some word it says, if your eye is single, all your body shall be enlightened. But if your eye is evil, all your body shall be darkened. If then the light that is within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, as we look at that text or these two verses, we understand that all of us human beings, we have two eyes. And so the very nature of the text challenges anatomy of the body. Yeshua doesn't say your eyes. He says your eye, speaking in the singular. And so some people have used this as a metaphor. But I believe if we look at it by way of a metaphor, the whole thing collapses into some kind of abstraction. Yeshua was looking at something more real. So as I indicated, the denotative meaning is that we have two eyes. But the connotative meaning is that Yeshua was talking about a different eye. In fact, some cultures refer to it as the third eye. The third eye. In Ajna Chakra in Hinduism, they see it as the third eye. And also in Tantric Buddhism. In Christianity, most of you know that people usually put an halo around the head, that area of the head, with a light. They're signaling the same thing. And of course, in Egypt, the Eye of Horus is the same thing. So throughout the different cultures, written in the syntax of different languages, we see different people expressing the same thing, but the curriculum is the same. And so this morning we want to look at it from the scriptural point of view. And if you turn with me to Yahanan chapter 2, that's the book of John, we'll take the second portion there and begin at verse 19. Yeshua answered and said unto them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Yehudis, the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spoke of the temple of his body. The disciples, his Talmudim, they realized that he was talking about his body, the temple. And so when we read in Matthew chapter 27, and when he cried out with that loud voice that it was finished, and the curtain was rent in two, was torn. At that point, the external temple was replaced by the inner temple. And that's what Yeshua, he's here talking about, the inner temple. In fact, last week we talked about 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16. Paul, the apostle, was asking the question, did you not know that you are the temple, the sanctuary, the mikdash? Did you not know that? And we indicated then that perhaps even today, most people are not seeing this in its literal sense. The word is letting us know that the physical temple, according to Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8, build me a sanctuary so I may dwell with them. That was really a shadow of the real temple, you. He wants to dwell in you, not in bricks and mortar. So look at it this way. If the physical temple, the ancient tabernacle built by Moshe and the Levites and the skilled artisans, it had 3 layers. It had an outer court. That would be your skin. And it had a holy place. That would be your heart and the internal part of you. And it had a most holy place. And that would be your brain. That's the most holy place. And within that holy place, only the high priest could go in once a year. So your brain, and within the brain sits in the middle a cone-shaped pineal gland that produces fluid that regulates your sleep pattern day and night. And so that is the pineal gland that sits, as I indicated, in the geocentric center of your brain between the two hemispheres. And that's what Yeshua was talking about. If the eye is single, if the eye is single, and scientists have found out recently that the pineal gland is prone to be darkened by our own habitual practices like screens that we watch, TV, computers, and those kind of things. And when it is not activated in the way that it should, then our sensitivity to spirituality and other things becomes darkened. And so that third eye is really one of consciousness. And I want you to join me now in the book of Bereshith. That's Genesis chapter 28. And we will take verse 10. And the word says, you know the story very well, that Jacob and his brother Esau had a conflict, a dispute. He had stolen his brother's blessing and was on his way running for his life. Verse 10 says, and Jacob went out from Beersheba and went towards Haran. And he came up on a place and stopped over for the night, for the sun was down, and he took one of the stones at that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed. This is the pineal gland that is responsible for that. And saw a ladder standing on the earth, and its top reached to the Shamaim, and saw messengers of Elohim going up and coming down on it. And see, Yahweh stood above it and said, I am Yahweh Elohim of Abraham, your father, and the Elohim of Yishtak. The land on which you are lying, I give it to you and your seed. So Jacob had a dream, and he dreamt, and he saw angels, ministering angels, ascending and descending. But what did he see? And how did he see? Because he said he saw Yah. What Jacob really saw was, remember, the body is the temple. And the temple here is being likened to the tabernacle that was early built. The tabernacle, the physical bricks and mortar, they were shadows of the real thing. Because we, who are the temple, we no longer need the approval of the pastor, of the elder, of the deacon, of the bishop, of the priest, because we are, each of us, a temple, a sanctuary where Yahweh dwells. And as a consequence, institutional churches now are losing their power, their influence on people who are now seeing as they should. So what did Jacob see? He was really looking at the vertebrae. The vertebrae. He looked and he saw the cervical and he saw 7 vertebrae. He looked at the thoracic and he saw 12. Then he looked at the lumbar, that's the lower part where the nervous system is, and he saw 5. Then he looked again and he saw the sacrum, 5. And of course, he looked at the coccyx and he saw 4. And obviously, as we develop the sacrum and the coccyx, they merge into one, and in all, he saw 33 vertebrae. And notice where the vertebrae leads to. The vertebrae leads up to the head, to the neck, where it ultimately meets the pineal gland. It brings information there. So come with me to Genesis again, and this time we will take chapter 32 that was read for us earlier, and we will begin at verse 24. And the word says, and Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Now, earlier on, we talked about wrestling with Yah. That's how you get your name, Israel. You cannot not be doing anything and then simply just change your name to Israel and think that's it. Names are synonymous with character. And so when Jacob's name was changed, his character was also changed. And when he saw that he did not overcome him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was dislocated as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I am not letting you go until you have barak me. I want you to bless me. So he asked him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. That's quite interesting, because one of the things that puts us in relationship with Yah is honesty. A few years ago, Jacob was a deceiver. He had lied to his father, said that his name was Esau when he was really Jacob. And he did that to get a blessing. So he deceived. Now, someone was watching there. The very same person here who he's wrestling with saw that interaction and now asked him the question, what is your name? You know, when your back is against a wall, sometimes that's the best time to reveal yourself, and easier revealing himself. He said, my name is Jacob. And this being here said, your name should no longer be called Jacob. You're not a deceiver anymore. Your name is Yisrael. And so we've got to understand the experience of Israel. Israel is a people whose name is born out of experience, like the slaves. They are the true Israelites. And I'm talking about the black slave who migrated from Israel to West Africa and were brought to these lands, England, Brazil, America, and the Caribbean and elsewhere. It's born out of an experience. And so they wrestled with. Our struggle has been a wrestling match. But it's almost daybreak. And we must, like Jacob, say, we won't let go until you have blessed us. Now, verse 30 tells us that Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen Elohim face to face, and my life is preserved. So when we go back to Matthew chapter 6, and Yeshua spoke about that eye, that single eye, that is seated in the geocentric center of your brain. This eye, it has the same photo lenses as your literal eye. So perhaps you would want to ask yourself, why would our Creator put a eye in the center of our brain where no light is reaching it? It's not exposed to external light. Why did he put there? Because this eye, this pineal gland, this eye is not built to look at external things, but to look at internal things, to deal with consciousness. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing this morning with the anatomical theology. That's what we're dealing with. To look at consciousness. So this eye, it links the physical with the spiritual realm. And Yah speaks to this pineal gland, and it is there we derive our consciousness. That's where we get our consciousness from. And so take note that the Mishkan, as I indicated, had an outer court and an inner court, and of course, the most Kodesh place. This is your brain, and within that brain is this gland. It is that gland. And so it is important that we understand that, as I stated earlier, that Jacob was looking at that spinal ladder. And that leads up to the pineal gland, at which time he becomes Israel. And the word says that when they demanded to know, are you going to destroy this temple in 3 days? This which has taken 46 years to build. 46 years. Those who could see, the disciples, they said, he spoke of his body being the temple. So these pineal photoreceptors, they are structurally and genetically similar to these two eyes we have here. But it acts, this pineal gland, as a third eye for the internal. And it really alike to the old endocrine system. It's the menorah. Remember, the temple, the physical temple in Jerusalem, had light, 7-branch menorah. And it's interesting that there are 7 major organs, 7 major ones. And so in this endocrine system. So when Yeshua spoke of this situation, those who were listening did not fully comprehend what he was saying. But his disciples, they understood what he was saying. They, like us, must understand when Yeshua said, the kingdom of Yah is within you, right inside of your head. So this morning when I said, our scholarship this morning takes us to the faculty of truth, I was not spelling that in the way that they did. Our scholarship was SKULLERSHIP, scholarship. Because the word here this morning is letting us know we have the kingdom right in our skull. That's our scholarship. Right in your own skull. It says that's where the kingdom dwells. It says, how then might you call yourself a scholar and you don't know that the kingdom is in your skull? You can't be a scholar. So we have that proximity that many people are looking for. We have that proximity to Yah because Yah now dwells in us by way of that 8 or so millimeter size pineal gland. Small, but it's there. And it's a eye that looks out and we receive information from Yah, and so we get our consciousness from that. It's internal, it's dark in there, and it's covered by fluids to control it in the sense that it protects it. And so this morning, we ought to know that we have a eye that is designed for us to see beyond the literal eyes. Turn with me to Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be what? Transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind, by way of your pineal glands. Be transformed. For who has known the mind of Yah? That he may teach them his own mind. But we who have the mind of the Messiah, that's Yeshua speaking to Paul, who informs us through 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 16. Who doesn't know the mind of Yah? Those who he has downloaded his mind to. And today we're reading as a reduction to words in his word. For they shall say, look here and look there. For look, the reign, the kingdom of Yah is in your midst, according to Luke 17 and verse 21. So he's telling you the kingdom of Yah is in the midst of your skull. So when he said the kingdom begins in you, you better understand what he was saying. Many of us are looking for the kingdom to come from the heaven. He said, no, it's in you already. And so the idea is not so much to look for a kingdom that is to come, but to recognize the kingdom that's already in you. That's the message. And so that takes us to Bereshith chapter 19 this morning. Bereshith chapter 19. And you know this story too, but we're trying to bring about this synthesis between the physical and the spiritual. We're dealing with biology. That's what we're dealing with. That's what we are. But it's more than that. We're also dealing with neuroscience. And so, because the two are different, we want that synthesis to bring them together, to merge them together. And this is what the high does. Because the high is placed in the physical body. That's biology. But it gets its light from the spiritual realm, which gives us our own consciousness to perceive things beyond our own limited edition of sight. And so in Bereshith chapter 19, and if we take verse 1, it says, "And two messengers came to Sodom." In the King James, it says Sodom. "And the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And when Lot saw them, he rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground. And he said, 'Look, please, my master, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet and rise early and go away.' And they said, 'No, but let us spend the night in the open square.' But he urged them strongly, and they turned to him and came into the house, and he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate." You recall that these are messengers who had earlier met with Abraham in chapter 18, and they had left him. And so the point I want to make here, that you know this was the season of Passover, because they had promised Abraham, next year we're coming back this time, and by which time Sarah is going to have a child. And so these messengers were on their way to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. But Yah does not destroy the wicked with the righteous, as Abraham wanted to know. Would you do that, the judge of all the earth? Would you do that? Yeah, I said, no, if you could find me a few, I will spare the whole place. And so Abraham was on his search to find righteous people in two cities. Now, if we look at that, and we need to ask ourselves a question, let's assume that Yahweh decided that he's going to destroy two cities. Let's say Fort Lauderdale and Miami, or London and Birmingham. Let's assume. And we, like Abraham, wanted to make a case for the righteous that lives in this city. And we would go to Yah, and we would present a case and say, no, there is a church down there, and there is a church down there, and one up there, and so let us search them. The question is, where would you start? Where would you start? Abraham went looking. And he was perhaps grandiose in his idea. I'll find 50. And you have to assume that 50 people in two cities is not a big deal. But he went looking and he couldn't find 50, couldn't find 40, couldn't find 20. And the word said he couldn't find 10. Remember, Lot, his nephew, had been down there witnessing for all these years, and Peter tells us that he's a righteous man. Peter says the things that took place in Sodom and Gomorrah, they vexed him daily, at which point Lot had been the chief judge. He was the magistrate. The Bible says he was sitting at the gate of the city. And when you see that statement in the Bible, it's more than just people sitting at the gate at the village. It's more than that. That's where business was transacted. He was a judge. But all his preaching and all his teachings, 10 people could not be found. So Yah decided to destroy the city. And so they urged Lot, the angels, to leave. They wanted to know, do you have any other people here? Join me at verse 14. The word says, well, let's start at verse 12. And the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? A son-in-law and your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of this place. For we are going to destroy this place, because the cry against them has grown great before the face of Yahweh. Before the what? The face of Yahweh. If you could see that through the pineal gland, that's the only way you could see Yah face to face. Moses saw Yah face to face. Ezekiel saw Yah face to face. And a number of other people. This is what they're talking about. When the prophets wrote and said, we saw Yah, they're not talking about with the naked eye. It was the pineal gland, the things that you cannot see with open eyes. No, if your single eye is clean, you can see many things. And so when you're dreaming at night, Yah comes and speaks to that pineal gland, and that pineal gland shines light up on the message, and you understand it in the morning. It's important. And so let's come back. The word says, they told him in verse 13, for we're going to destroy this place, because the cry against them has grown great before the face of Yahweh, and Yahweh has sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, get up, get out the place, for Yahweh is going to destroy this city. But to this sons-in-law, he seemed to be as one joking, jesting. Now understand something here. When the men of Sodom came to the house, they wanted to know, not in terms of greetings, sexually, these messengers. Lot said, take my daughters who have not known men. Take them. Now, I don't know why Lot made that comment, but the point I want to make in studying that is that he goes out now to speak to his sons-in-law, mean at least he has 4 daughters, 2 who have not known men, and 2 who are married. So that's 4 daughters, his sons-in-laws, that's 6, and his wife, that's 7. And himself, that's 8. That's 8 people. Still short of 2. Can't find 10, Abraham. Cannot find 10. So they urged him, get out of here. Run for your life. And verse 16 says, and while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand and the hands of his 2 daughters, Yahweh having compassion on him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. So you can read from that, and you deduct from this that 2 of his daughters and his sons-in-law, they did not come. And it came to be that when they had brought them outside the city, so they took them outside the city. Clear, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be consumed. Verse 26 says, but his wife, Lot looked back from behind him, and she became a post of salt, became a pillar of salt. Now, I want to take that because we want to talk a little bit about salt rhythm. Salt rhythm. Your body cannot keep its rhythm, neither mine, without salt. Your thoughts cannot travel and the cells cannot communicate with each other without salt. So salt is essential. It's the conductor. So salt with its cubic lattice serves as an antenna which forms liquid crystals. Salt is considered as spiritual technology in the body. That's what it is. A divine connection. Even our tears contain crystallized prayers. That's why David said, my tears, put them in a bottle, because his tears, he knows that his tears represent prayers, crystallized prayers. So salt is a sacred geometry that stems from the salt's crystal structure. So salt is more than those things you see in a shaker on your table. We're not talking about sodium chloride. We're talking about real salt. It is the invisible signature in your cells that resonates with human consciousness. Your problem, therefore, might not only be mental, but more so vibrational. If you don't have enough salt, you don't make that vibration. You don't connect with your pineal gland. And so even when you go to the hospital sometimes, one of the first things they do, they give you saline, salt water. They know it's important. And so we're dealing here with spiritual faculties. That's what we're dealing with this morning. Salt is important. So join me in Matthew chapter 5. And we will take verse 13. Ye are the salt of the earth. You're what? You're the salt of the earth. You are the antennas of the earth. You are the spiritual technologies of the world. That's what you are. You are going to connect to other people's antennas and to their gland, their pineal gland. So you're going to help them to see. That's what Yeshua was saying when he said that to the disciples. You're the salt of the earth. It is thenceforth good for nothing if the salt loses its saltiness. So you cast it out and be trodden on the foot of men. And moreover, you are the light of the world. Are you with me? You are the salt and you are the light. Your pineal gland makes you different. It sets you apart. You can't hide that candle under a bushel. And so when I say I see, someone may well ask me, well, what do you see? But I'm not looking with my eyes, I'm looking with my pineal gland, because the consciousness that comes to me doesn't come through the eye. It doesn't come through the external world. It comes through the spiritual realm, through the Ruach. That's what I'm dealing with. And so we, like the disciples, become vessels carrying divine energy in human form. You know, salt under a microscope mirrors the pattern of geometry, having a thought that you did not authorize shows up in these crystals. Remember, we talked some time ago where a gentleman, a scientist, did a research and he spoke to the salt water and said, I hate you. And when he examined it under a microscope, it had the structure, the geometry structure of illness. And the same water, he liquidized it and froze it again, but having spoken to it prior to that, saying, I love you. And at this time, it was perfectly formed crystals. That's how important salt is. And so the word says in Bereshith chapter 19, verse 23, the sun was risen up on the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then Yahweh rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Yahweh of heaven, and he overthrew these cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. It's not a casual statement. Salt preserves the integrity in the human form. Everything that it touches, it preserves. It's a spiritual conductor. It transmits divine energy to others. Salt was required in all the Old Testament sacrifices. So the profundity of salt is deeper than human biology. Salt carries spiritual vibration, and vibration respond to context. As I indicated before, the body cannot function effectively or efficiently without salt. It is sacred geometry. That's what you should understand. It is not just a mineral. It is sacred technology, a spiritual conductor, which organizes itself into perfect geometrical crystal and bridges the chasm between the physical and the spiritual realm. And so when Mrs. Lot became a pillar of salt, it preserves the thought that all those who look back, that's your destiny. Salt. Salt that the body needs. But I wonder, as we read through. Because sometimes when we read the word of Yah, we have a tendency to bring our cultural understanding into it to explain something that is Hebraic. So in the context of our study this morning, did Mrs. Lot turn and look around, or did she look by way of her pineal gland? Was she conscious enough? And perhaps you might reason, as some have done, that this woman had left 2 daughters in Sodom, 2 sons-in-law, knowing full well that they would be destroyed in that which was to come, the fire and the brimstone. Would you not have been tempted to look back and even to think that maybe they're coming, they're running, they're coming? But she's not physically looking back, but the pineal gland, that gland of consciousness, is conceiving from another realm. Could it be? That's what happened. Because we know now that Yeshua was not talking about the eyes. That's not what he was talking about. He was talking about that little cone-shaped gland that sits in the epicenter of your brain. That's what he's saying. And also when he talks about salt, that when salt enters the bloodstream, it not only regulates the fluid, balance the nerve functions, it is a cosmic connection, just like the pineal gland. It carries the memory of the cosmos. Salt does. When was the last time you've been to the beach and went into the ocean and when you came out, you feel somewhat refreshed and different? That's why sometimes, the medics will recommend you have a salt bath, because it balances everything. Salt does. And of course, as I indicated, I'm not talking simply about sodium chloride. So that substance of salt, it carries spiritual resonance. And so Mrs. Lot became a pillar of salt. And she represents those wayward souls who look back to their whole ways. They look back. And so when salt energy encounters resistance, it crystallizes rather than slow into spiritual expressions. It crystallizes. Are you with me? Miss Lot here was resisting the resonance of the language spoken to her. Flee for your life. Don't look back. And so when she resists that, she crystallizes rather than flow freely, as her husband did. And so she became that object of salt that we look at, because these things are written for our admonition. So the pineal gland, this specific anatomical location, It swims, does it not? In what kind of fluid? It swims into this fluid that is salty to protect it, covered by bones around it. And so we need to understand that our study this morning also explores why ancient civilization guarded salt, they regarded salt as sacred. In fact, today when people work, they get their salary. People used to be paid, the Roman soldiers used to be paid in salt. And that's where we get the word salary from. That's how sacred salt was to them. So salt bridges the physical and the spiritual realms. And that's why it works well with the pineal gland that links the spiritual with the physical. You are the salt of the earth, and you must not allow your light to go out. In the temple, and we'll close on this, the temple's menorah was never supposed to go out. It must continue to burn all night. And so it is with the pineal gland. You must not allow the food you eat, the screens you watch, or any other things to block, because it is more prone to take up some of these things and deactivate its spiritual potency. And so Yeshua is speaking to us and saying, don't let that light in your skull. Be scholarly. Not as the world is scholarly. Because you have a kingdom that is right there in your skull. And your pastor doesn't seem to know that. Because he still thinks you need his approval. And you're no longer trying to buy proximity to Yahweh because Yahweh dwells in you. You're not only the salt of the earth, but you are the light. You're reflecting the light that Yeshua places in you. What a reality. And so that kingdom doesn't come by observation. Doesn't come by that. And so this pineal gland that Yeshua spoke about in Matthew chapter 6, it says, if your eye is single, not dual, not talking about these, not talking about the biology of that. It says that single eye, it has photoreceptors, cells that sees in the dark. It sees in the dark. And it regulates the whole system, the circadian system, and it produces melatonin. That's what it does. And so that's one of his primary functions. And it sees in the dark. Even when you're sleeping, Yah speaks to the pineal gland, and you are able to communicate with your own vertebrae. And so Jacob says, I see him, and I see messengers bringing information from the spiritual realms right down here to the crown of my feet. Wow. May Yahweh open our eye rather than our eyes, so that we may see. Because all men are born blind, it seems. And he says, I've come so that the blind could see. Now we're seeing. Let it be so. In Yeshua's name I pray. Amen.